All right, we are live, ladies and gentlemen. The national debt is currently closing in on a staggering $35 trillion. Even more alarming, the cost of maintaining that debt is approaching $1 trillion annually. And this is just the interest payment on the debt. Is this sustainable? Also, how long will the dollar remain the king currency when we pursue such reckless monetary and fiscal policy? We're talking about all of this and more on episode 455 of the In the Tank podcast. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal. And joining me today, I've got Chris Talgo. He is the editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. Chris, we missed you last week. How you doing, good sir?
Well, I'm doing good. Summer's, really hitting its peak, its prime. Donnie, last year was supposed to be my summer, but this year I'm really making it, summer of Chris. Just like summer of George, I'm going to be probably, I don't know, maybe just working on that big cheese, that big, what was he working on? A big giant, like just
a wheel of cheese?
A wheel of cheese.
Yeah. How many rounds of golf have you gotten into?
Oh, geez. Dozens.
Dozens. Nice.
Dozens.
Awesome. Also joining us, we have Sam Karnick, publications director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
Doing just great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Fantastic. And for everyone where's Jim? Jim wasn't on last week. He's not on this week. What's going on? He is on vacation for the past several days. If you are craving the classic Jim rants, fret not. He should be back in the saddle again next week, unless I have anything to do with it. But you'll likely see him next week. But
whoa, no. Next week is July 4th. I will be celebrating the independence of this amazing country. I will not be on this podcast. I don't know about you, Donnie.
You know what?
Sorry.
Remains to be seen. I think we still probably will do an episode, but I don't know. We'll see. A special July 4th episode. All right, but before we get going, audio only listeners, I put this message out there every week that you're probably catching the show on a Friday or later. If you are, leave a review for us on iTunes. That would be greatly appreciated. And also consider joining us a day earlier on Thursdays at noon Central Time, where we are live streaming this on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and X. You could join the conversation, throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. You could also support the show by just hitting the like button, sharing this content, subscribing if you haven't already, or just leaving a comment under the video. All of those things help break through those big tech algorithms to prevent content like this from being shown to more people. And also, we are on week 3 of being demonetized by YouTube for just basically unknown reasons. They won't give you a straight answer, even when you appeal the decision. So we are unmonetized, so you can't help out the show by sending us a super chat, but you can help us out by going to heartland.org/inthetank, and you can support the show that way. And you know what? It's a better way of supporting the show, because that way YouTube doesn't take like a 30% cut of the super chats. So that money would be directly coming to support this show. So if anyone wants to do that, I encourage you do so.
Donnie, I have to chime in here. I think the reason why we were demonetized is not a question. It's because, you know what? We actually say the truth. And unfortunately, in today's day and age, when you say the truth, bad things happen to you. So just want to put that out there for everybody.
Yeah, the truth, telling the truth is a rebellious act in an empire of lies. Am I right, folks? So support the show, heartland.org/inthetank. But we do have a lot of stuff to get to. This is a very, very interesting show. Just like last week, when I was doing the prep for the show, it became more interesting to me as I was developing the notes. So I want to get into it, but I can't get into it without making at least some mention of the fact that tonight is basically round one of the political Super Bowl that is the upcoming presidential election. Joe Biden will be taking on challenger Donald Trump in a debate featured on CNN. That's happening tonight, right? So I want to know, Chris, how excited are you for this? No live audience, multiple commercial breaks, the new quiet Trump rule, which allows them to mute microphones unless CNN allows somebody to speak. So how excited are you, Chris? Are you going to be getting your popcorn ready? What's up?
Dude, I am so excited for this. Okay, in all seriousness, I mean, the build up to this has been pretty crazy, and here it is finally upon us. The day of, we're hours away from one of the most monumental debates I'll probably ever watch in my lifetime. I've been watching, a lot of coverage, pre-coverage, different networks, MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, the usual suspects. And a lot of them, and I agree with them on this, are saying the 90 minutes of tonight's debate could be one of the most important 90-minute blocks in this country's history. I truly believe so. So yeah, there's gonna be 2 commercial breaks, which is, kind of weird. But I guess, they need to give Biden some time to, do whatever he does.
Maybe inject some caffeine directly into his neck or something like that.
Whatever they do for him. But here's an interesting thing that I just learned. So Jake Tapper, he will be one of the co-hosts. The other one is going to be Dana Bash. Did you know that Jake Tapper was once the spokesman for Hooters restaurants? And he does not like it when you bring that up. So I just want to make sure all of our audience knows that Jake Tapper was once the spokesman for Hooters restaurants. I mean, I actually think Hooters has great wings, among other things. But in all seriousness, Jake Tapper and Dana Bash are completely, political animals. They both are unabashed, Trump haters. So I'm going to be really focusing on how they treat the 2 candidates. The past couple debates, going back to Candy Crowley when she interrupted Mitt Romney and, quote, fact-checked him against Barack Obama, even though her fact-check was completely wrong, that opened up this new activist, like mantra among these supposedly neutral, non-biased debate hosts. And I have a feeling that tonight is going to be really bad. I have a feeling that they're going to frame questions in favor of Joe Biden, and they're going to fact check Donald Trump. And I should say fact check Donald Trump. And I mean, I hope it doesn't go off the rails. And I really hope that they talk about the substantive issues that Americans care about: the economy, immigration, crime. Those are the big 3. Please do not spend an hour on January 6th or whatever else that they're probably going to spend the vast majority of time on.
Oh, no doubt.
We don't care about that. The American people don't care about that. The American people care about the future, not the past. So I really hope that this is a good debate. I really hope that both Trump and Biden have ample time to speak. And I really hope that we come away more informed about what they plan to do.
Jake Tapper, right? Am I right?
Mm-hmm,
Am I right, folks? Boom, boom, boom. So I expect to see a very frustrating debate where Biden is tossed softball questions, where it's just basically giving him opportunities to tee up his pre-planned campaign rhetoric, explaining why the economy is actually doing great. Don't believe your lying eyes when you go to the grocery store or anything like that. It's actually doing great. Whereas Trump surely is going to be forced to answer for his alleged crimes in January 6th. I really, that's like anything beyond that would be a surprise to me. But Sam, what do you think? Chris mentioned that this might be the most important 90 minutes. I think other people maybe more cynically might think that this isn't going to move the political needle. People have made up their minds already. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to incline toward the more cynical side and agree with you on this, Donnie. I think that it's going to turn out to be more like a Babylon Bee video, where the hosts the moderator is ridiculously bias toward one of the candidates. We'll see which one it is tonight. But the chances are, as you say, that there's not going to be much substantive discussion of anything. That, of course, is in great part on you can lay that on the actual candidates themselves. They're not very strong on substance, either of them, typically in these kinds of environments. But the problem is that this is a really important election, and there's a lot at stake here, and we'll be getting into that today. If they just go up there and talk about January 6th, as Chris said, and I fully agree with him on this, there's no chance that Donald Trump wants to create an authoritarian government in this country. When you see the Democrats or anybody else on the left say that the people on the right or the Republicans are doing something awful, there's one thing you know: the Democrats and the people on the left are doing it, and the Republicans are not. So it's clear that they've done everything they can to impose authoritarian rule on this country, the left and the Democrats under Joe Biden, and that is a real thing. How Trump could possibly turn the discussion toward that tonight is difficult to imagine. That's why I think it will end up being a sort of an absurdity.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to go. Generally speaking, when it comes to like anything political, I do tend towards the more cynical side. This one, I do think that there is an opportunity for it to be changing certain people's minds, just because ever since January 6th, Donald Trump has been kicked off virtually all social media. CNN obviously never has him on or anything like that. Nobody has him on anymore. Maybe he makes some Fox News appearances or something like that. But I think for like a lot of people, this is going to be like the first time seeing Donald Trump like in person again, like since he was president. So as long as he actually like puts forward like kind of a clear message of, the economy under Biden is actually terrible, like you can believe your eyes, and inflation, all of this is due to reckless fiscal policy, championed by the left and Joe Biden. And I, on the other hand, am going to like lead us back into prosperity and do all the things that I did while I was president for 4 years times 2 or something like that. I could see people be like, you know what? He's not as crazy as they're making him out to be. But we'll see.
But Donnie, here's one thing that I think is definitely going to happen. What they're going to do is they're going to pick and manipulate certain things that Donald Trump says to make it seem way worse. So, and this has been happening for a very long time. If you watch the full debates between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, I think almost anyone would have said, yeah, Mitt Romney just torched him in all of those debates. However, what did the mainstream media do? They put together little clips to make Mitt Romney look stupid and to make Barack Obama look great. And that's happening even more now with social media and this whole, 10-second video, revolution. So I'm pretty sure that what they're going to do is they're going to splice and dice all of the comments that Trump makes to make it look as terrible as they can for him and make Biden look as great as they can for him. Mm-hmm. I just hope that the vast majority of the American people who watch this debate, maybe they're going to watch it in full, maybe they'll, watch 60% of it, half, whatever, that they're going to still be able to see through that. Because the mainstream media is going to do everything they can, and the big tech, platforms and such, to make Trump look as terrible as possible, to make Biden look as good as possible.
Sure.
But if the American people just watch the debate in full, because it's going to be simulcast on every single main channel tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern time, that guess what? They will see in real time what these two candidates are actually proposing and what they are capable of doing.
Oh man,
that's a vital element. The important thing is not so much to win the debate, but to win the debates about the debate. Sure. And that's been the case ever since television started running these debates with Richard Nixon. He won the debate among people who listened to it on radio.
Yep, sure.
He lost it according to people who watched it on television. That is clearly not a rational answer on the part of the people who are watching in television. Mm. And it's always the case now.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch.
I'll tell you
I'm kind of excited to see Trump kind of on that main stage again. So
one other quick thing. I was watching a little bit of pre-coverage on CNN yesterday, and they are going to be only 8 feet apart. That is a lot closer than they were in 2020 because of the COVID stuff. They were like 20, 30 feet apart. So they're going to be very close to one
So
another.
you think Biden's going to take a swing at Trump at some point?
I think the fact that they're going to be so close to one another is going to make it, I think, better for us watching to see how they actually interact, because you don't have to do
Sure.
the double screen. You can just have one camera right on both of them at all times and see how they're reacting in real time. So I think that should be, pretty interesting. We wanted to do the split screen thing.
Yep.
Biden's approach in these debates has been to be very feisty and to prove himself as a fighter for the working class, blue collar people. If Trump can present himself as a calm person tonight, I think he will make huge inroads. That's a big if.
Yeah. I think all of these things are kind of big ifs, because I don't even know if I know that like Biden likes to put on his aviator sunglasses and take on that dark Biden, persona or something like that. But that's like when they have film cameras and perfect lighting and they can edit it 50 times or something. I don't know if he's going to be able to put forward that same sort of energy when he's like live on stage, maybe in like really short bursts or something like that. So I would assume that he's going to try to take the more regal, like I'm just professional over here, and hope that Donald Trump is just like shouting into a mic that's not on the whole time. I think that's probably their grand strategy.
And the way that it's set up, each candidate is going to be given 2 minutes uninterrupted to respond. Can you imagine Biden off the cuff for 2 minutes talking about, like issues? I mean, geez,
he's going to get like 8 words out.
I think he's going to struggle mightily. And I think the fact that they are literally turning off the microphones for whoever's not speaking for that entire time, so you cannot hear a word they're saying. They show what it's going to be like. I think it's actually going to put Biden, in front of everyone. I think he's going to have some major problems and stumbles, and that people are going to.
I want to keep track. I want to keep track of how many times like the CNN hosts interrupt Trump. Because if it's like this idea, you have 2 minutes uninterrupted, we're going to mute the other person's mic. But that doesn't stop them from interrupting him. I wonder if those 2 minutes, they're going to be like, nope, that's actually incorrect, sir. Like that sort of thing. So
well, they can do that all they want. But people like us and the social media and so forth and people on Twitter will capture all that and show what the bias was. So it's not like it was in 1960 or even in 2016 or 2020.
Fair. Come on, man. All right, let's get into our main topic here. I want to. This is kind of the larger implication of all of these things is based around this. Whether we're talking about specific policies or specific political matchups or anything, or even this upcoming presidential election. This is the larger concept, and that is just like the sustainability of the United States and its economy. So I want to base this entire discussion around, at least using it as a leaping off point, this article from the Wall Street Journal that I have in the show notes that is titled, "Will Debt Sink the American Empire?" So at first, I kind of balked at this topic because it's felt to me for a while that the national debt is kind of a tired topic that really hasn't resonated with the public for probably close to a decade now. During the George Bush administration, I remember this was like a big topic of discussion. The national debt went from $5 trillion to $10 trillion under the Bush administration. And during his initial run for presidency, Barack Obama referred to the doubling of the national debt under George Bush as unpatriotic. But then when Obama got the reins and he served as president for 8 years, we saw the national debt double once again from $10 trillion to $20 trillion. So I don't know what that makes that if the George Bush doubling was unpatriotic. The pace of the debt accumulation really hasn't slowed down all that much. It currently stands, like I said, around $35 trillion. However, this is where it starts getting interesting to me again, is when it comes to the interest paid on the debt. So like your debt, anyone listening to this podcast, whether it be credit card debt or any other type of financing you might have, car or house or something, you have to pay off the principal, of course, but you also accrue interest on that debt. This is the same story for the national debt. Generally speaking, as the debt goes up, the cost of servicing that debt goes up. However, additionally, on top of that, the cost of servicing the debt is also dependent on the baseline interest rates that's controlled by the Federal Reserve. So if there's a small interest rate, generally the cost of servicing that debt is smaller than if there's a large interest rate, right? So back in the George Bush years, the interest payments on the debt was roughly $300 billion. Pretty staggering amount of money in itself. This equated to about 2.5% to 3% of the GDP. But in terms of tax revenue, it was closer to 15%. So during the George Bush years, 15% of all the money collected in taxes by the federal government went to servicing the national debt. Like, this is in the mid 2000s, right? Fast forward to the middle of the Obama administration. We'll pick 2012 as the year for this. Interest payments on the debt was roughly $420 billion. This equated to 2.5% of the GDP, or 17% of all tax money collected by the federal government. And remember, this is post 2008 crash where the Fed brought interest rates way down. So the cost of servicing that national debt was also decreased, but it still went up to $420 billion. So now let's look at today's numbers. National debt, $35 trillion. The interest rates are much higher than they've been basically since the late George Bush years. And today, the cost of servicing the national debt is $1 trillion. This equates to 3.5% of the GDP, or 23%, basically a quarter of all taxes collected go to just paying the interest on the debt. So unless I'm mistaken, this expense is now the single largest expense for the federal government, is paying the interest on the national debt. This is larger than national defense. This is larger than what they spend on Social Security, larger than Medicare, whatever. It's the single largest slice of the pie when it comes to federal spending. So, Chris, just baseline before we get into anything else, what are your thoughts on this whole situation we find ourselves in?
Very, very precarious situation we are in. Donnie, you know, and you laid out a paper that we just put out a couple months ago talking about CPI minus X, how to rein in this out of control spending. I mean, we are in a very, very dangerous place with our national debt surpassing GDP. I mean, this is unprecedented. This is, this is only supposed to happen in times of like world wars, where you spend tons of money, to fight a war, knowing that, hey, once the war's over, you're going to drastically reduce that spending. I mean, I cannot believe that we have let it get to this point, because I remember back in the Barack Obama days when Paul Ryan was talking about this and saying, guys, we're on the verge of a debt bomb here. Like, we're in really, really, like bad place right now. We have not done a thing about it. We have added so much more to it. And I'll be fair here. This is a Republican and Democrat thing. This is not just the Democrats overspending when they're in, control of Congress. This is Republicans doing the exact same thing.
Sure.
I mean, but one of the only bipartisan issues that is alive and well in our nation's capital these days is just runaway spending. And, it's just so frustrating that the American people, we know that this is unsustainable. We know that people in our generation, Donnie, you and I, are not going to see all the money that we're pouring into Social Security, because what have they done? They've taken that trust fund, the trillions of dollars that were supposed to be stuck there for people like us when we retire, and they have spent it on other things. So we are just we are so not even close to balancing the budget. And whenever we talk about cutting spending, it's always at the margins. It's like we're talking like, oh, well, we can cut a couple billion here and a couple billion.
Yeah.
No. We need to cut a couple trillion here, a couple trillion there. We need to do that for years and years and years. We need to pay down this debt. This is part of the reason why the American people are struggling so much, because our economy is just is stagnant. Our economy is stagnant. It's not growing, robustly. There's so much unnecessary federal spending that's gumming up what could be a very, very healthy economy. And it's going to take a lot of courage for a Congress to come in and say, wow, enough is enough. We need to actually do something about this. I guess the only thing that we can use as, a way to be optimistic about this is, hey, back in the mid 1990s when the Republicans came up with the Contract for America, they actually did do this. But that was such a different time period. That was way before their healthcare spending was going through the roof. That was back when our federal spending was much more in line with what it should be. And that was back when Bill Clinton, of all people, said the era of big government's over. We were cutting welfare. We were cutting all this unnecessary spending. We have just gone so far from that. And it's not just the politicians who are responsible for this. It's the people too, because the people keep voting for these same people who go in and say, I'm going to cut spending. They don't do anything. Throw them out. So
yeah, I remember it was like sequestration. Right. What was like the sequestration thing over like the government shutdowns in like 2010, 2011, something like that. And I remember, I'll never forget this, like Nancy Pelosi, like after these like proposals to not increase spending in any like future fiscal year or something, she was like, the cupboard is bare. Like there's nothing left to cut. It's just like, if that's like your idea of what cutting spending is like, then there's no hope. But that's
just to give our viewers a very like simple look into how chaotic the federal apparatus has become. The federal government does not even know how many departments it has.
Oh, sure.
When we were putting together that policy study about the national debt and how to bring it back down, we were focused on spending, because really it's the spending. It's not the revenue. It's the spending. We spent months researching this, and the federal government does not even know how many departments it has. Think about that for 1 second, just how insane that is.
Right. Yeah, Sam, another way to look at this, in the 1980s, the national debt was the equivalent of 31% of the GDP. By 2000, the national debt was the equivalent of 54% of the GDP. During Obama's tenure, it went from 65% of the GDP to 100% of the GDP. And now, currently, the national debt represents 120% of the GDP. So, what are your thoughts? How sustainable is this?
Well, first of all, of course it's not sustainable. But the point is, and what we have to keep in mind is, it is entirely 100% a spending problem. It is not a tax problem. It is not that tax rates are too low. Now, here's the problem that we have. No matter what you do in terms of tax rates and how many taxes you put on the American people, you get approximately 17.4% of GDP year after year. It goes up and down a little bit, but that's what you get. That's your bottom line. 17.4% of GDP is all you can raise. It's all you can squeeze out of the American people. Now, so you can say, well, we're going to get more out of those rich people. Doesn't matter. You're going to get 17.4%. You'll get 18 some years and 16 others. But the reason that is because when you tax something, you get less of it. So if you are taxing harder, you are getting less of what you tax. So you're going to get less tax revenue than you expect. Now, we are now spending 25% of GDP per year. So what's 25 minus 17.4? Okay, that's what, almost 9% of GDP difference. That's what we're borrowing, because the only way you can get it is to borrow it. So what happens is you create all these pressures throughout the economy by overspending. The problem is strictly overspending. We can solve the problem immediately in two ways, which would arrive from a single means, which is reduce spending to the 2019 level. It's absolutely 100% doable. Reduce spending to that level, and your revenues will actually increase to the point that you will actually be paying off your debt within a few years. That is absolutely necessary if we're going to prevent some of the catastrophic things that will happen to our economy in the coming years.
What level did you say? What year? Reduce it to what year's level?
2019, before 2020.
Yeah, pre-COVID.
Isn't that absurd that like what you're proposing there is like probably thought of as like a radical proposal or
Right.
something. When like 2019 was like what 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago. Like you're not like, revert it back to 1960s level of spending or something. Like we're just talking about like 4 or 5 years ago, folks.
I have written, Donnie, that remember 2019? Remember all the people starving in the streets
Oh
and
yeah,
the dogs eating human corpses and the like?
Right.
How bad was it? I remember that unemployment for certain ethnic groups and it was the lowest ever.
Sure.
And the economy was fantastic in 2019. So we were spending too little. I've actually said that I would be willing to even go with an inflation adjusted 2019
Sure.
spending number. I don't approve of it, but I could see that.
Right.
But the problem is that this overspending is what creates the inflation in the first place. So there are just so many bad things that come out of this overspending.
Donnie, it's not just the debt that we have now; it's the unfunded liabilities.
Oh,
and
sure.
if you could bring up the U.S. debt clock, go to usdebtclock.org, and if you look at the unfunded future liabilities, it is so mind-boggling that it is just like, is there any point to this? And that's what's really, really scary. So if you look at the if you could just key in a little bit on where is it?
Yeah, I think it's below that blue section there, right?
It's in
right there, bottom right there.
Yeah, U.S. unfunded
liability.
$216 trillion. That is just such an astronomical number. $642,000 per U.S. citizen.
Right.
Look at that. Social Security unfunded liability, $26 trillion. Medicare, $41 trillion.
Right.
Oh
yeah,
my gosh.
That's just going to be funneling slowly into the national debt over the course
Andy,
of the next
if you could just
60 plus years.
Scroll back up for a little bit, all the way to the top, and then you can click on one other thing. You can click on the future one. If you scroll a little bit to the left, you can click on so the time machine. Just click on maybe like 10 years from now or something, and let's see. I
didn't even know that this was a thing.
Go
all the way at the top there, Andy.
All the way at the top. Go to the time machine. Yeah, so I don't know. You can just like check one of those, but just see how bad it's going to get in 2028. Sure.
Yeah, click 2028. I've never seen this.
This is like a couple of years down the road. 46 trillion, another $10 trillion, and that's with no new spending.
Oh yeah, that's just following the curve. That's not any other wars or other catastrophes or anything like that.
We would be at 147% of GDP. That is, just look at that number. Look at 1980. When Reagan first came in, and the late 1970s were not good, by any means. But we go from 34% of a debt to GDP ratio to 150%.
Right.
Remember that the increase in debt under Reagan was entirely caused by increases in spending. Revenues went up when he cut taxes.
And the debt to GDP ratio went down, and that matters a lot because here's the thing: under Biden, we've had very, very slow growth, like 1%. If we're lucky, most of the time. If we had robust growth at 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7%, something like that. Oh my God, the national debt would dwindle because there would be so much more revenue coming in. Like Sam said, there's something called the Laffer curve. And this is just like common sense. If you tax 100% of all revenue, are you going to get like 80 trillion? No, of course not. You're going to get close to zero. At the same token, if you tax zero, are you going to get any revenue? No, of course not. There's a sweet spot, and I can't remember the exact number, but like Sam said, it's less than 17%. You find that sweet spot like Reagan did, and you get the tax revenue just pouring in. But it's fine because you're having economic growth occur so much greater than that. That's how people get ahead. That's how the nation gets ahead. Right. We have not been doing that for a very long time. And every single time they say more taxes is the solution, No, more taxes are going to put us into a even greater amount of debt.
Sure.
This happens in
Yeah.
cities and states that they get into this debt spiral. That's because there's a big difference between raising tax rates and raising tax revenues.
Yep.
And you see all these graphs and numbers showing the deficits and debts, and those are useful, but it's only if they're accompanied by the figures on the spending, because the spending is what drives the deficits. Always. It's always that. Tax rate cuts lead to tax revenue increases. This is especially the case when we are so far along the Laffer curve as we are today, where taxes are so high, and regulation, which is a tax, is monumentally, it has increased monumentally under Biden, much faster than it did under Barack Obama, which was pretty much unprecedented. The only one I can think of who added regulation on that level was probably Richard Nixon. So what's going on here is that you're putting so much weight on the people who pay taxes that they can't get out from under it. You can't raise more money from them. The only thing you can do when we're so far along the Laffer curve, as you see here, is lower the tax rate.
Sure.
And that will increase the revenue rapidly.
Yeah. Go ahead. No, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. There's another aspect of this, Sam. Years ago, most people in this country worked, meaning that they were net makers. They created wealth. As Mitt Romney said famously in 2012, 46% of this country now is a net taker. It's gotten worse because of COVID and the fact that so many millions of people have dropped out of the labor force and just said, I can figure out a way to live off government benefits without working. The more you're doing that, the more pressure you're putting on those of us who are actually paying our taxes. So that's a whole nother aspect of this. And that's why I go back to the Bill Clinton thing, because Bill Clinton said, you know what, we're going to do welfare reform and we're going to get people back in the workplace. By getting people back in the workplace and off of welfare, it's like a double good. Not only are they not sucking up welfare benefits, whether it's SNAP or any of the other welfare benefits, but they're also producing tax revenues. That's what we want. Right now in the United States of America, half the people, they don't pay 1 cent of income taxes. And guess what? They get money from the government. They just get money. They don't pay a cent because they don't work. But they get all these taxes back. And on top of that, they get all the federal and state benefits. So that's just another huge portion of this that, during Donald Trump's presidency, one of the greatest things is that the labor participation rate went up. It went up among all groups. Under Joe Biden, we've had the exact opposite occur. We've had the labor participation rate go down among all groups. And Donnie, I think you and I talked about this once. In the 1950s, 90% of all men in like working age years, I guess it's like 18 to 60 or something like that, 90% worked. Nowadays, it's like it's like 50. So how is that possible? That's just another aspect.
The labor force participation rate after the Great Recession went down by about 2 percentage points. And it only very slowly worked its way back up, really beginning with the Trump administration. And then in 2019, it's almost back up to its peak. And then what happens? You get 2020, drops down. Now it's going back up. And I think that the problem that we have is that we are suppressing economic growth in so many ways that although you're getting more labor force participation, you're not getting as much out of them. You're not getting the productivity increases that you used to get. And in fact, productivity increases usually track with participation growth, labor force participation growth. They usually track with that. So I think what we're seeing here is that there's too much suppression of the supply side by government. And I tend not to like the term the economy. It's the production of goods and services, the supply of things. And that's what really counts. And our government, especially the federal government, but all levels, have been suppressing the production of goods and services so badly that you cannot sustain any kind of growth. And certainly you can't sustain an empire in that way. Now, that Wall Street Journal article, Boy, I
Well, no,
like the fact that
that's a perfect segue because I'm going to read off some of these like historical cases because a lot of the article is based around just pointing out, some of these other empires throughout history and them kind of running headlong into this problem. So this is like the meat of the article. So I do want to just kind of read through some selected pieces of this. And then I'll get your take on it. But Rome, it says, after establishing their empire as the world's most powerful, Rome's leaders began spending lavishly on imperial administration and on the army in the 3rd century. Emperors financed the resulting debt by debasing the currency, which generated high inflation. This weakened the empire's oh my goodness, I can't read. Stability and defenses, leading to its demise in the 5th century. It goes on to talk about Spain. Spain financed its military adventures and globe-spanning empire with extensive borrowing from abroad and high taxation, eventually losing its status as Europe's greatest power. France traveled much the same path and defaulted frequently on its debt. Ultimately, profligate borrowing and spending by the court at Versailles caught up with the royals, producing deindustrialization and fiscal crisis that led to a revolution in 1789. I think that went really well for them, by the way.
Yeah.
China's Qing dynasty went through a similar cycle and encountered a similar fate. It was the leading world economic power in its time. But spending and foreign borrowing in the 19th century led to damaging underinvestment in the infrastructure needed to keep advancing. Great Britain may offer the most compelling parallels. It oversaw the world's most far-flung empire through the 18th and 19th centuries before war spending, including the fight against the American Revolution, produced high debt. It recovered, but by the 20th century found that it could no longer afford the spending required to maintain an army and navy to police the empire and to finance rapidly growing social programs. So debt began crowding out other investments, and economic weakness sapped the strength of the British pound. The pound ceased being the world's leading reserve currency, and the British Empire soon declined. So, Sam, I'll go back to you because you were going to reference all of this stuff. It seems like this is just a pattern that occurs throughout time. I don't know if it's just like baked into the cake, and these people have a level of hubris where they can't see that that they're spending based on just their current status is going to lead them toward down a path of demise. But I don't know. What do you think? Are we destined for this? Could this be seen as a wake up call? We can turn this boat around. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's baked into the cake if that's the cake you want. Go back up just above the picture of Bill Clinton there. And the paragraph starts, historian Neil Ferguson, everybody loves Neil Ferguson lately, and he's a doggone good historian. Look at this word down here. Line 3, any great power that spends more on debt service than on defense will not stay great for very long. I have that word defense highlighted because we're not spending on defense. We're spending on empire. Defense, we can defend our country very easily. We have the Second Amendment. We've probably got the best defense of all human history. What we do, though, is we have built an enormous empire. It is incredibly wasteful. That's why all those other empires fell, because empires fall because they are wasteful. And one of the reasons empires fall is that you have to protect those far-flung interests. So what do? You buy people and weapons, all right? How do you get that money? You get it from your taxpayers. But there is the iron law that you can only squeeze so much out of the taxpayers. So what happens is somehow it's too costly to hold on to your empire. Well, yes, it is. It is too costly to hold on to any empire. And the United States was never designed to have an empire. Sure. And in fact, if you want to go back and blame somebody, blame Thomas Jefferson, because he made the Louisiana Purchase, which really was the first step in us becoming an empire. And of course, I love Jefferson in principle, but as a president, he did some pretty dubious things. And don't forget that he sent troops to the Barbary Coast to rescue Americans from pirates, which was a good thing to do. But when you come down to it, we have had an empire almost from the beginning, and it becomes increasingly expensive, increasingly wasteful. If the United States were, in fact, to dial back on its international obligations, we would have a huge step towards solving all these problems, because the key is it's all about spending. Taxes don't have anything to do with it. Tax rates, if you it don't have anything to do with causing the deficit, except insofar as tax rates being too high makes it impossible for you to grow the pie from which you are taking your government spending. So we do have to choose as a nation. This would be a great question to hear the candidates address tonight. Unfortunately, would probably ruin any chance of Donald Trump getting any Nikki Haley voters on his side. But we have to confront this. We do have to confront this, that this empire that we built is a big part of what's costing us. And you know what? Maybe some of that domestic spending is being caused by the big drain that the empire puts on us.
All right, I'm going to go to Chris. I'm going to go to Chris next, but just to defend Thomas Jefferson, Louisiana Purchase, at least that was an expansion of like the contiguous United States, as opposed to like setting up shops in different parts of the world to try to like harvest resources and stuff. But Chris, we were briefly talking about this before, and you thought like, well, it's kind of hard to compare 3rd century Rome to like modern day United States. So after Sam was talking and I read through all of that stuff, what are your current thoughts on this comparison?
To be honest, I slightly disagree with Sam. I don't think that we have a modern empire. I think we've never had a modern empire. I think that when we have gone overseas, we've liberated countries, whether it be Puerto Rico, the Philippines. We did not take over those countries and plunder them for their resources. That's just not true. So we've not had to do that. We've not had to, unlike the British and the French and the Spanish did, where they went into these giant territories and said, we're going to control all of you. And if you don't listen to us, well, then we're going to kill you and we're going to do all this like terrible stuff. The United States, we just haven't done that. The most of our spending is on the domestic level, not at the international level. I think the spending on Ukraine is kind of stupid. I think some of that, but that's drops in the bucket. That is not what's really driving this. And I wish that we would actually defend our country, actually defend our border. So I just think that the parallels to a modern day empire with the United States is just not. I mean, they're not factual.
Actually, it would be more profitable to Americans if our government had plundered those places rather than just spending money.
But think about it, we didn't do that. We went into Iraq to free the people. We didn't steal one drop of the oil. Now you can say the reason that we went in there was maybe for different reasons, but we did not go in there to plunder those countries.
But it was incredibly wasteful.
We went there. We went there under what I consider to be the naive auspices of we can go there and make them like us, when I think that culturally they're not like us, so they are not going to instantly overnight become like us. But to say that what we are doing now is the same as what happened in the 16th century, France and Spain, when they went to these far-flung places and literally just took them over and plundered them dry of all their resources and treated those people terribly. I mean, that is just not what the United States has ever done.
I don't want to get. I don't want to get
$13 trillion on just Iraq. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean
that's a lot.
We did not spend $13 trillion in Iraq.
When you consider all the costs and the opportunity costs, that's what it comes to.
Yeah, I mean the amount of.
I'm not going to defend our war in Iraq and Afghanistan because I disagree with the
amount of spending, and we could debate the amount of spending and the role in policing the world and whether or not that constitutes an empire or whatever. I still think the idea that that's overextending what the original vision for the United States is pretty much without question. But I don't want to get too bogged
But I
down on
mean,
this because I want to get to.
but just also real quick, if you just look at the amount of money we spend on the military, we spend less than $1 trillion per year. Our federal budget's upwards of $6 trillion. So that means that we're spending less than 20%. So the whole notion that the main reason why we are in the place that we are in is due to over expansion and unnecessary military spending is simply not true. I mean, the facts just do not support that.
Oh, well, you're certainly right that it's not the only reason, but I think it is emblematic of the problem, which is that we have become by nature an empire, and people just sort of look at that as
that graph
just
is
a good thing to do.
Not accurate. That graph is not accurate.
All right. Yeah, like I said, we're getting bogged down. I want to keep doing it.
I mean, but it's important to make sure that we get our facts straight and that we, are, being truthful to our viewers. I mean, just to say overall that the reason why we're in this position is because we have gone on all these crazy military ventures. That's just not true.
Yeah, that's
no, that is not true. Economy. That isn't true. That's the only reason. No, we're spending incredibly wastefully on entitlements. Yes,
exactly. That's where the giant portion of the budget is going. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid make up like 2/3 of the annual budget. That's where the money is going.
But what the Wall Street Journal article,
16%, exactly.
What the Wall Street Journal article was positing is, to me, wrong. That we're going to go down because we are because our needed spending is so high. That's not it. We're making these choices, and that was my point. Is that I was using that as a representative of the whole problem, which is that we make the choice to spend however many $1 trillion in places like Iraq and Syria and Africa. We've been spending tons of money in Africa. We don't even talk about it.
But that is a drop in the bucket compared to
Afghanistan. But we're spending all that money, and that's part of the whole problem, is that we're spending all that money on domestic things as well, SNAP and so forth. And these things are totally unmanaged, just like those wars were totally unmanaged. And these are choices. Where the writer of the Wall Street Journal piece, I think, is wrong, Saib, is that these are not necessary things. They're choices. We could choose to cut spending at the very least to the 2019 level. We could choose that. We choose not to.
I agree, but if we were to repeal Obamacare and if we were to get rid of the Medicaid expansion that went along with it, I mean that in and of itself would be one of the biggest cuts of all time. I mean, that in and of itself would be a greater cut than if they were to cut the entire military to zero. Think about that.
Right, but I think it's also kind of disingenuous on the other side to just completely dismiss any of the foreign battles, throwing money at. I mean, like how much conservative outrage has there been over sending billions of dollars to Ukraine? Like that's also part of this equation too, right?
Of course.
But so yeah, whatever makes up, like I can go through all of those examples that I read off through the Wall Street Journal, and it just basically boils down to over leveraging the spending, debasing the currency, all of those sorts of things. What they're spending on historically, in the past, it's driving these kind of empires or whatever, might not resemble exactly what we have today and what we're spending on. The composition of what the spending on is different, but the spending is the thing that I wanted to focus on, not getting bogged down on exactly what it was, right? And in that Great Britain example, it said the pound ceased being the world's leading reserve currency and the British Empire soon declined, which is a transition to the other topic that I wanted to talk about, which is the US dollar's role as the global reserve currency. So one of the major macroeconomic factors that have helped secure the United States at the top of the economic food chain is that the United States dollar being the major world reserve currency. So this arrangement goes back to like the 1940s with the Bretton Woods Agreement, where delegates of 40 plus state nations agreed to peg their currencies to the US dollar. This system made the US dollar the central currency for international trade and finance. And then in the 70s, the dollar status of world reserve currency was further cemented when the petrodollar system was established, that essentially required all oil purchasing and oil selling to be done using the dollar. But over the past several years, maybe even more than that, there has begun fears that this global arrangement might be coming to an end. So there's always stories here and there, they just pop up, and they always have this kind of subtext of like, oh, is this signaling something bad for the world reserve currency status of the US dollar? Some of these stories include like China selling dollars off their balance sheet, buying gold, other countries diversifying their portfolios. More recently, Western sanctions on Russia accelerated efforts from Russia and other BRIC countries to develop an alternative to the dollar when it comes to international transactions. And the most recent story, as far as I'm aware, is in regards to Saudi Arabia. Over the past 50 years, the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia has been changing. U.S. represents a decreasing percentage of global GDP. The U.S. has also pursued more domestic oil production. And perhaps most importantly, China has become Saudi Arabia's biggest oil customer. So because of these things and more, I'm sure, Saudi Arabia has a growing appetite to foster a system that does not require the U.S. dollar for its other international transactions. So one of the biggest problems with this is the threats that if the dollar loses this global reserve status and countries no longer need to hold gobs of dollars for international transactions, then those dollars would likely and naturally flow back into the U.S. monetary system, leading to potentially massive levels of inflation. So this is kind of one of the more major threats that could kind of upend the American empire. And I use that kind of colloquially, like I'm not going by like the definition of the term, just like the hegemony of the United States when it comes to like global economic affairs. But what are your thoughts on that, Sam?
Well, I think you make an important point here, and I'd like to touch on the issue of if those dollars were to flow back into the United States. I think what is more likely is that these dollars would become non-existent as banks would as you create a decrease in the production of goods and services in your country, and banks lend less, because that's what you do. You borrow money to build things and buy things, and that's both on the consumer level, of course, and the business level, not to mention the government level. Mm-hmm. So what happens is that as banks withdraw this money from the economy, then what you actually get is a decrease in what's called GDP, gross domestic product. So I think what is more likely to happen, because of the overspending and the incredible distortions that the U.S. government has made in the economy, is a retrenchment overall. And so the flow of those dollars, I think they would actually kind of disappear. Mm-hmm. It's worse than, I think that's worse than what you're describing.
I think it's worse too. And here's another reason why. Because as we have just been printing all this money for the past few years, I mean, we're talking trillions. If you go and look at like M2 money supply and stuff like that, I mean, it is just crazy. Guess what happens to the value of each and every dollar? It goes down. So these countries I think are starting to say, wait a second, you're printing funny money so that you can just pay off that crazy debt that you guys have grown, and you want us to also do that? And they're saying, no. That's why an alternative currency, or even a global currency, I think is more than ever possible, because I think what they're saying is, sorry, United States, you guys did a terrible job maintaining the value of the dollar, and therefore we don't want to be dragged down with you. And that is what we are doing. And that is a really dangerous game to start playing.
Can I
Yeah.
make just
So
a quick observation about the amount of dollars out there? There's a good argument to be made that China actually has too few dollars. China does not tell us how many dollars they actually have in their accounts. So there's a good case to be made that China doesn't have enough dollars, and that's why China and other BRICS countries as well, in fact, countries around the world, have been buying a lot of gold. The
uh-huh.
problem is you have to get those dollars regardless of whether you have gold. All that will do is that will increase the price of gold more and more, and it will push down the value of the renminbi even farther. The Chinese currency.
Right.
It'll push down the value of that. It'll push down the value of the ruble. It'll push down all the values of all those currencies. And guess which currency wins? The dollar.
Sure.
So the funny
Yeah.
thing is that I think there's not necessarily enough dollars in the world right now.
Yeah. Okay. So one last thing that I want to bring up on this topic is the Atlantic Council. They just launched a dollar dominance monitor. So this is a new tracker that analyzes why the dollar is currently the world's dominant reserve currency, presents indicators for tracking China's progress in creating an alternative financial infrastructure, and creates a novel framework and data set for evaluating strengths and weaknesses of the world's major currencies. And according to the Atlantic Council, despite the efforts of Russia and China and Saudi Arabia, that the dollar's role as the primary global reserve currency remains strong and is secure for the near and medium term. And the tracker does show a decline in the dollar over the past, I don't know, couple of decades in terms of world reserve status, or at least like the way that it comprises people's portfolios of these other countries. It also shows BRIC countries loading up on gold. So I don't think
on gold.
so I don't think the intention of the Atlantic Council's tracker is just to say like, oh, there's nothing to worry about, folks. I think that they just are trying to like counter like unwarranted panic. And to Sam's point about China, to me, like increasingly so, like at least since like the 90s, people have been trying to take like China into account when its role in kind of the global economic or just like foreign policy realms. But the biggest difficulty with that is that like China is such like an X factor because they're so not transparent with anything that they do. I mean, we saw that in spades when it was during the COVID times. So like there is a 50-50 shot. Like if you're at the craps table of whether or not like China is going to be like a superpower in the future, or it's just going to like crumble into dust under their ghost cities. Like we don't really know. But yeah, I don't know if it's like sound the alarms, like, the dollar's crashing right now or anything, or if we've got a few decades.
China.
One thing we do know. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Oh yeah. So China just erased $7 trillion in value from their big zombie corporations. But guess what, Donnie? This is a very important aspect of this. The fact that China has access to our financial markets, and the fact that you can, and I hate to say this, but that financial managers, asset managing companies like BlackRock, like Vanguard, like State Street are pouring hundreds of billions into China. That is just keeping China, propped up for the time being. If we were to just say once and for all, China, you guys don't play by the rules, you steal intellectual property, you commit human rights abuses, all this terrible stuff, we are going to not let you have access to U.S. financial markets, China would crumble in literally instantly. So, right. But at the same time, we and our companies want to have access to that market. So we're in a like a slippery position right now because, China is definitely an adversary. They're definitely a threat. They're definitely, probably going to invade Taiwan at some point. But so many American companies, out of sheer greed and short-term, wanting to, increase the flow of money, they look the other way and allow China to do all this. I don't think that's going to keep going on for years, especially if Donald Trump comes back into the White House in 2024 or 2025. So, given all that, I think that when you look at the long-term trends, there's still hope, but the short-term trend shows that we need to get our house in order, and that goes back to the very beginning of this thing. We need to get our fiscal house in order.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly
Sam, I'll
do.
give you
And
final words on this.
Okay, thank you. We certainly do need to get our fiscal house in order, and China is a great example of why. China is swamped in debt right now. China is in very, very bad condition. They're in no position to tell anybody anything. And one of the things that's happening, like Chris pointed out, that they're marking down debts to zero. They're zeroing them out. That's what I talked about, the idea of the money coming out of your economy. So what's happening there, though, is why is all this happening? Because the U.S. in particular is importing so much less from China than we were just a few years ago. And so China can't get those dollars. That's why they're stuck and they're trying to buy gold. But that's, again, it's just going to push up the value of the dollar. I think if anything, the future is in the other direction. Strength of the United States, provided we make the choice to stop spending so much money through our government.
And reshoring some manufacturing back here, because for a long time in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, China was the cheapest source of labor. It's not that way anymore. China's, they want to be a developing country, but they're not. They are definitely a developed country, and they are having trouble transitioning from the developed country into this modern country with a thriving middle class. Yeah. So China's got its whole, China's economy is a basket case. Right. We can solve this. This is all self-induced. And that's the best, that to me is the most optimistic part about this, but it's going to take some courage.
Yeah. I was just going to say, like, it's just amazing how much could change if we just made some simple changes,
maybe in November.
Let's stop putting our foot on the throat of reliable energy. Let's enhance that energy production in the United States. Let's
if we're going to reshore,
the regulations.
Our government has to get out of the way of production in this country if we're going to reshore. If we're going to have jobs here, that's what's going to have to happen.
Sam, I was intending to have a little bit more time left for this, so you're going to have to be a little more brief. But for all of those that are interested, that have appreciated Sam's comments and kind of the points or just these topics in general, Sam, you are in charge of the Life, Liberty, Property newsletter from the Heartland Institute. You want to tell folks about that? Maybe briefly discuss what's on the latest issue and where they can go to subscribe to that.
Thanks, Donnie. I really appreciate it. At the beginning of every week, we issue this newsletter. It goes out to many, many people. And what it covers is what is exactly is going on in the United States in economic terms and in terms of what is the role of government, which is to protect our life, liberty, property, not so much to extract them. And taking that perspective, we go through the news and look at the big trends. So it's all the things that you've heard about today are things that we've actually covered within the last few weeks at Life, Liberty, Property. And I'm very pleased that we can get some of this information out there. The things we've been talking about China, for example, that's an issue that we've been covering for quite some time. And it's certainly plausible to say that China can be a great danger to the United States economically, but there are subtleties to these things and complexities. Our economy and our country are composed of wheels within wheels within wheels. It's all very complicated. And what I try to do in Life, Liberty, Property is give you a through line so that you can see all the data. You can kind of figure out, and I'll guide you through it, that some of this data is clearly false. Some of this data is just dubious. Some of this data is actually pretty good. And so guiding you through all that to get to the basic principles, looking at things from a free market perspective. And this free market perspective, in my view, is based on our rights, not based on, we'll get more money. I care about that. But the fact is that if we are allowed to follow our desires to make things and build things and serve one another, if government gets out of the way of that, good things happen. Mm-hmm. But government doesn't have the right. Nobody has the right to tell you that you can't braid someone else's hair and take and accept money from them for it. No one has the right to tell you that. That is tyranny. And we're enduring this throughout all of our society. And that's really where life, liberty, property goes. We go into those issues and look at them from the fundamental level. These are your rights. How are they being fostered and how are they being stepped on by government, and what would make a better way?
Right. So you can go and subscribe to this, heartland.org/subscribe. There's a whole actual listing of different newsletters and different stuff that you can sign up to. But one of those listed there is Life, Liberty, Property. And I would encourage to do so. There's a very interesting one this week about, just this kind of the state of the spending power and how that translates into housing and all of that. That was very interesting. I was planning on doing more of that in this episode, but we are short of time. But
thank you, Donnie. It'll stay an issue.
No doubt. Yeah,
It hasn't going away anytime soon.
No, it's not. Gentlemen, any last words? Any funny stories? Anything you want to get off your chest before we wrap it up for this week?
I'd just like to say that the key thing is choice. These are choices that we make as a people, and we have a chance in November to make choices. Let's do the right thing.
And it just reminds me, because we started off the joke like talking about Trump and Biden, and then we were like talking about these like very heady macro issues, and it just further just like, if I ever had any doubt, this just like solidified it, that I am just so much more interested in talking about these policy discussions than politics. And whether or not you hate Donald Trump because of the mean things he says or whatever, it's like all of that is just background noise for these like much larger, much more important things that are going on. And that's what we try to give when we do these episodes on In the Tank. But I do want to thank you all for tuning in for this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Join us every week for a new episode. If you are listening to us on iTunes, the audio-only version of this, please leave a review for us. That would be greatly appreciated. Or you can join us, you can join us a day earlier, Thursdays at noon Central Time, where we are live streaming this on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and X. And you can join the conversation, throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comment on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. Help out our show just by hitting that like button, sharing this content, subscribing if you haven't already. Just leaving a comment under the video all helps break through these big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. Also, we're demonetized, so if you want to support the show financially, you can still do so by going to heartland.org/inthetank and specifically support this show. It is greatly appreciated when you do so. If you'd like, you could follow us on X at In The Tank Pod. And if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for the show, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Sam Karnick, thank you for being on. Where can the fine people find more of your work?
Thank you, Donald. You can check out my socials at ST Karnick. And of course, subscribe to Life, Liberty, Property. And also, you'll find me in all kinds of newspapers and other websites where I write plenty of op-eds. So check us out at the Heartland Institute, and you'll find plenty to stimulate your anger or happiness.
Fantastic. And Chris Talgo, what do you have to pitch today?
Donnie, I have a product by you to pitch. It's called the Heartland 40th Anniversary Benefit Dinner. You put together this amazing postcard. It's coming up soon, September 13th, Chicago. Be there. You got to be there. That's all I can say.
All right. That's good. Way to pitch that. That's team player right there. All right. Thank you all for tuning into this episode. We will talk to you next week.
He's a lion, dog-faced pony soldier.